This week we are going to study John 2:13 through 25. So let's read the passage. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and the money changers sitting there, and making a whip of cords he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned the tables. And he told those who sold pigeons, "Take these things. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scriptures and the word that Jesus had spoken. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus on his part did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. John 2:13 through 25. In this passage, Jesus goes to Jerusalem for the first time in his public ministry for Passover, which he attended every year and mostly in Jerusalem, as was required by the law. We can almost be certain that this was not the first time there had been merchants and commerce happening in the temple while Jesus was there. It was the first time since his baptism and since he had begun his public ministry. This is why he had not driven out the merchants and money changers before this point. One reason Jesus did this was that it was prophesied that he would clean the temple in Malachi 3:1 and Psalm 69:9. Another reason he did this was that it needed to be done, because the temple had become a house of trade, which is obvious when looking at the passage. We see that the priests, who had their own temple guard, which they arguably could have used to stop Jesus from kicking out the merchants, but did not, which shows they could see the corruption which was in the temple. The merchants probably got a license to sell in the temple from the chief priest. They probably started off with a little price gouging when compared to the prices that were charged outside the temple. Then they slowly started marking up to see what they could get away with without getting kicked out. They also probably started giving out certificates that the product that they were selling was perfect for sacrifice. Then they may have even started to try to convince those who brought their own sacrifices that theirs was defective, so that they would need a new one. The corruption was pretty obvious to anyone who came into the temple. They probably did not even care why they were there, but rather what they bought. It is likely that on top of the tax that the priest also received a considerable sum from all sales in the temple. Jesus knew what was in the hearts of the priests and the merchants and the money changers. He knew without even seeing the corruption that was in the temple. So what Jesus did was not mean, and his anger was righteous anger, and it needed to be done. Is it wrong to sell stuff in modern churches, as some do? I think it depends on your motives. We also have to remember that the temple was where God dwelled up until the veil was torn when Jesus died, making God's dwelling place men's heart for all who would receive them. Our bodies are now a temple. We have to remember that if you are a Christian, you are the temple, not the church building. It is just a place of meeting where God only dwells if we are gathered there in his name. It is the body of the church that is more comparable to the temple than the building of the church. When Jesus comes into our lives, He does not just want to dwell with everything else that has made residence in our hearts. He wants to drive everything out that is not of Him. But just like the priest, we have the power to stop Him from kicking them all out. We may try to smuggle one, thinking we can hide it in the back of our hearts. He knows your entire heart, and you cannot hide anything from Him. When thinking about Jesus driving out everything that is in our hearts that is not of Him, if you do not fill it with things that are of Him, then the ones that were driven out will return and will bring with it 7 worse than it. If the priest did not fill the temple with things of God, then the men who were running the shops and money-changing stations would go out and talk to their friends looking for jobs, and then more corrupt would come and fill the stalls where the others were. Whereas if the priest decided not to allow them back in and put God there, then when the 7 worst came to put up their stands, they would not find a place and would be kicked out of the temple by the temple guards. The same is true in our hearts. When Jesus comes in and drives out our old sinful behaviors and habits and anything that is not of Him, we need to fill those places in our hearts with things that of Him. And when the habits come back to find a place in our hearts, they will have no place, and the guard of our hearts will tick them out. In this passage, the Jews were stirred up and asked Jesus what sign He gave them for driving the merchants out. He did not immediately give them a sign, but He performed miracles in Jerusalem, and many believed in Him because of. In other words, what the Jews were asking was, who gave Him authority to do anything in their temple? This shows you right there what their God was. It was not God in the flesh standing right in front of them. They were saying that this was their temple, not God's. They were their own gods. This is the same thing that many of you want to think about your own body/temple, that it is your own when it is not. What authority do you have over it? You cannot control anything. A microscopic organism shut down the whole world. How long will it take you to realize that your life is not yours? It is a gift, and we can squander that gift, or we can use it for a greater glory, for His kingdom. So this week, ask God to come and clean your temple/heart, to drive/take all that is not of Him out of your temple/heart. Remember also that He knows your heart, which is both an amazing and a terrifying thought. You cannot hide anything from Him. We all try, but none of us ever succeed. He is the King of all and loves you more than anyone ever could. But He is just and wants you to come to know Him as your Lord and Savior. So make sure you have done that today. It is the most important decision you will ever make.